Hi, my name is Corinne and I'm a student at Middlebury, and I'm making this video because this is my last resort. I don't know what else to do and I need help. I'm asking for help both in the sense of maybe you know someone who does disability rights work, and help in the sense of financial support so I can get a lawyer who actually is able to look at my individual situation and help me have representation in dealing with the school that whenever I try to bring up anything, including when I brought up things that were recommended by an attorney that I was able to get through a Vermont nonprofit, I'm mostly ignored, often insulted, and overall told that I'm simply just a bad student and not treated as though I'm disabled and actively trying to use my accommodations repeatedly and am being mistreated because of it. This sucks. There's no other way to put this. This is not a situation I ever thought I would find myself in, especially not at 22. This is an issue when I've been sitting here and trying to recount the story as quickly as possible that I've realized has been present since my freshman year. And the problem is, I am disabled. Technically, I've always been disabled because I've always had ADHD, but what I haven't always had is vision issues as a result of concussions. My first head injury happened at Middlebury during my first semester when I hit my head on a poorly covered part of the couch in Stewart. And ever since then, I've had a near impossible time having Middlebury adequately deal with the fact that my eyes don't always work and I have a hard time with screens. And I've had multiple head injuries since then. And this is something where I think it's best if I give you an example. Imagine your assignment is to read this and then to spend, I'd say, however long it takes you to write a 2-page essay based on the label and all of the individual characters. And you have 5 days to do this. And so you think to yourself, okay, I have 5 days to do this. I'm a full-time student. I have lots of other homework and other work that needs my attention. I'll save the last 2 days for this assignment. And then the last 2 days come and you go to look at this Crayola pack and it looks like this. And you can't read what it says, and you can't really see the characters. You can kind of see the pink one. You're like, I guess I could write an essay just based on the pink one, but that probably would get me not very many points. And you go, wait, I have accommodations, and my accommodations say I can occasionally have 1 to 3 days for extra time. And you say, hey, could I have 1 to 3 days so that my eyes work and I can actually see this? And your professor says, no. That was such an easy assignment. I don't understand why you need any extra time. You had 5 days, Corinne. You had 5 days to do it. And then after that time passes, you look at it and it looks like this, and you're like, oh, she was right. That was such an easy assignment. Stupid me. Why did it take me so long to do that? Why didn't I just prioritize this one class when you're a student in 4 different classes? You're a full-time student. And the reason you have these accommodations is so that if by chance, when it comes down to the 2 days for you to do this assignment and it looks like this, that you have the extra time to be able to actually do it and to have equal access to your education. And this has been my problem since I was 18. When I was 18, I was in this class and I was dealing with 2 concussions that semester. I also was in a carpeted room with a severe dust allergy, and every single week I would ask the people who were my support system, in quotes for a reason, if there was any way for me to get accommodations at all, which were not given to me until the very end of the semester, at which point it was really too late because accommodations can't be done retroactively, even though I clearly needed and had been asking for accommodations for multiple months at that point. And if even for basic things, like I asked, hey, can I not live in this dusty room? My room is carpeted. It was the only carpeted dorm in the building. And they told me I couldn't move out because of COVID. And I said, well, if I can't move out, can I hire a professional cleaner? Can you guys hire a cleaner? Can someone please vacuum this carpet? And they said no, because of COVID. And every single time I asked for an accommodation, they acted as though I was being ridiculous and that I just simply needed to accept that I was a bad student who shouldn't be at Middlebury. And they pushed for months for me to take a medical leave of absence. An option at the time would have meant that I was either in an unsafe situation or homeless for 8 months. And me being a very smart student who very clearly just needed accommodations was like, well, I think I'll actually be finishing the semester. But then the day after the deadline for medical leave had passed, a very close relative of mine took his own life unexpectedly. And I was all of a sudden 18, alone in Vermont, trying to figure out how to grieve a suicide. And I just remember my dean saying to me, "Oh, I'm sorry to hear about that. How are you going to make sure you don't get kicked out of Middlebury?" And that was the attitude. And at the time, I was in cell biology and also a French class. And I had been talking to cell biology, had gotten through the lecture, like genuinely passed the lecture done. It was like worksheets and a interview project that I had done. And I had been told, okay, we'll pass you in the lab. You just need to get these 2 final lab reports in. And I had been working on them when my relative had taken his own life. And I reached out to my French professor and said, "Hey, I need like an extra week on this essay. I know it's already really late and this is like part of a negotiated agreement," because I was having a really hard time with screens and with essays and with reading. And every time I go to try to do an essay, it was a grab bag as to whether or not screens would look like this, or whether or not I'd work on a screen, the screen would look like this, and then all of a sudden my eyes would just be like fluttering back in my head and I wouldn't know what was going on because I was having a really hard time with screens, even though a lot of my other cognitive faculties were working just fine. I just needed accommodations, and the school was just simply refusing to give me them and also essentially bullying me for having the audacity to think I needed them. And this is the French professor, "Can I have an extra week? My relative killed himself and I'm having a hard time." And my French professor said, "No, I'm going to fail you in French." And because I was only in 2 classes at the time, on very bad advice from my dean, I dropped the 3rd one. Failing 1 class, which if you're a full-time student means nothing, not even probation. If you're just in 2 classes, even if it's for disability-based reasons, means you get kicked out of school. So I was getting kicked out of Middlebury, and at that point my cell biology grade didn't matter. And so I emailed them, said, "Thank you so much for being willing to work with me. I'm failing this French class. I'm getting kicked out. Maybe we'll reconnect if I ever get to go to college again." Because at the time, my dad, one of his favorite threats was that I just simply would never be able to continue college. So I really didn't know if my educational journey was just ended forever because I had gotten kicked out of Middlebury. Thankfully, my relative who had killed himself left me just enough money to endure Middlebury's horrific process for after they kick you out, where you have to go to another school. You can't go to a community college or else none of your credits will transfer, and prove that you're good enough. And I was able to spend all of my inheritance money to do a single semester at University of Minnesota to prove that I wasn't a failure and was in fact just disabled. And I thought that when I came back, Middlebury would actually accommodate me because I believed them when they repeatedly told me that I was the problem and that there was no issue with them in accommodating me. I just simply didn't deserve to be at Middlebury. And upon returning, I continued to have issue after issue after issue with my accommodations. And I was enrolled in cell biology again about a year ago, and it started off just fine. And then I had the misfortune of having a friend who I had met online die. And we had connected through shared struggles of not feeling supported at Middlebury, and her name was Evelyn, died at Middlebury on campus and wasn't found for a bit. And as someone who had personally experienced how deeply isolating living at Middlebury can be, living on a single in LaForce and just being alone for hours and hours at a time was the reason why I ended up moving into the food house, where I then lived with, and have lived for 2 years, 17 other people, or up to 17, it fluctuates a bit. And so dying alone in my dorm and having no one know I was dead for days was a personal fear of mine, and I never thought I'd see that realized in my community, let alone to a friend who I had treasured and loved, and who truly to this day, I mean, she's dead now, but has the fullest account of all of the horrors that happened to me during my like that spring at Middlebury that ended in me being branded an academic failure and getting kicked out, mind you, during COVID, as a student with 2 concussions trying to do online college and being told that no accommodations were possible. Or beyond the, no actual accommodations were possible. And I started having nightmares, got prescribed a medication for nightmares that dropped my blood pressure too low, and this is a week after she was found. I took the medication, was up, and it was 3 a.m. I passed out because my blood pressure dropped, hit my face on a chair as I fell, and got a really bad head injury. And most of my other professors that semester were so nice and so understanding because I was a student who had just lost a friend, someone a trusted confidant, and then gotten a brutal head injury as an indirect result of that death. And also saw me as an intelligent, capable person who, if given the time, would be able to do enough work to pass her classes. Except for there was one other class I was in that was entirely screen-based, and that one, the professor actually gave me so much time to be able to see if I would be able to be well enough to be able to do it within that semester. But cell biology, the professor immediately started making derogatory comments about me and about my injury, and it progressed to a point where every single week I was having to remind her that my doctors say I should be here. My doctors say I'm allowed to be here. My physical therapist says I'm allowed to be here, because she was constantly trying to tell me that I should not be in school. I was too injured to be there, and trying to get me to leave. She also would make comments, like, not even comments, she just said, I don't want to give you participation points because you look concussed. And I said, but I'm here and I am participating in class. She goes, yeah, but you're here with your big shades on, and I don't feel like you're getting as much out of class as everyone else. And that was her reasoning for not wanting to give me participation points. She also told me that if I was going to continue to have vision issues, I continued to be disabled, that I needed to find another major. And eventually I got close to Thanksgiving, forced out of the class, even though my written reports had gotten really good feedback, because it was unfair to other students if I was allowed to even get a D at in the class at that point, because it became clear that I'd have to truly do things on a different timeline than other students, which is allowed. You can get accommodations that allow that, and also is allowed if a student's severely injured going through horrific extenuating circumstances. And in retrospect, I wished I would have gotten a disability lawyer, and also wish I would have just written the 11 other people in that lab section and said, hey, I got a concussion because of anti-nightmare medication that I started taking after Evelyn died because we were friends and her death messed me up. Is it okay if I get a D in this class? Does that hurt you on a personal level? And I cannot imagine that my lab mates would have been anything but supportive, but instead this all just happened in secret. I got forced out of the class and had to drop it. I rolled it again freshly this semester, and I was kind of hopeful, especially because I knew that so many of the assignments were the same, and I'd already been through so much of this class, and I presumed that they would either allow me to turn in work that I had done, given that it had never been truly given credit, or exempt me from certain things that I had already demonstrated mastery of, because, mind you, cell biology is an entry-level class, and so much of the lab is simply saying, do you know this skill? And I'd already demonstrated last year, yeah, I know this skill. Yeah, I know this skill. And then I got COVID my second week of school, and ended up missing 2 labs, thankfully labs that I had been in the previous year. And my lab professor got really mad at me for not showing up to school with COVID, eventually telling me that sometimes in life you just have to suck it up, put on a mask, and show up anyways, which deeply horrifies me to this day. That's not something you should ever say to students about not coming to class when they actively have COVID, and especially not when a student has already previously done that lab that year. And in this conversation, the professor asked me very angrily over email, or from my perspective, very annoyed over email, how I was going to make sure I didn't fall behind in the class. And I told her that I knew the TA and I was sure he'd be happy to help me catch up. And she informed me that talking to the TA about anything class related outside of their very strict TA hours was a serious departmental violation, a violation of biology departmental rules, and also showed that I didn't respect the TA. I had never heard of this rule before, but I believed her, and I didn't know that belief in what she very clearly and plainly told me over email would then go on to ruin my semester and be something that she later denied ever implying. This also is the point where I had missed a quiz that was a microscope identification quiz. To go back to the metaphor of simplicity, the quiz was the equivalent of if someone has a cup and someone asks, can you point to the handle on this cup? This is the handle. Can you point to the inside of the cup? This is the inside. Can you point to 2 flowers on this cup? That's a flower, and that's a flower. It was like that, the equivalent of that. And I'd already scored perfectly on it the previous year, and it was actually more complicated then, and they simplified it. And she refused to let me make it up by first giving me times that were during my lunchtime, meaning I wouldn't be able to eat for 9 hours. And mind you, I had all of Monday, all of Wednesday day, and all of Friday day free. So I had 3 days of the week where I was entirely free from 7 a.m. to 7 a.m. to like 6 p.m. And that was the availability I was giving for 3 days of the week. And she still could not find a time I could take this quiz. Eventually we go in, we're chatting, not chatting. She's explained to me why I can't take this quiz and why I'm ridiculous to even think I'd be allowed to take it at this point because I had missed 2 labs and that every other student had made up the quiz. And this is where this precedent of being told that every other student managed to do this thing, why couldn't you, starts to become a theme that would then haunt me through the entire semester. And also it's the first time that I'm told that I'm just confused in a derogatory manner, something that I'd never been told before and was honestly quite offensive as someone dealing with a brain injury. And she eventually agrees to let me make up this quiz simply because I'm so confused about how my accommodations really work, but says after this, no more Mr. Nice Guy, and asserts that she's going to be as harsh as possible on deadlines for me because she thinks that if she doesn't, I will fail. Which is just a horrible thing for a professor to tell you like 2 weeks in, especially when I had accommodations that were supposed to give me leniency with deadlines when I needed it. And then in this class, this becomes a repeating pattern where I try to use my accommodations and she dissuades me from using them for small assignments such as things like this. And it tells me that I can either get no points if I turn it in or 50%, which is an F. Also, during this initial conversation, she informs me that she had talked to the community standards person and that not only would I have to redo my entire first lab report, which, mind you, the first lab report for this class is, for so many people, their first ever introduction to writing a lab report, and it's a page and a half. It's graded based on completion. So you do get a grade that's like, these are the things you need to fix, but that doesn't actually contribute to your overall grade. It's just, you get 100% if it looks like you tried. It tells me not only do I have to redo this entire assignment, but that if I use any sentences from the past time that I did it last year, that will be considered plagiarism. Mind you, the punishment for that is expulsion. So I'm in this meeting being told that I have to redo a very basic assignment that I already did, but that if I use any words that are in my own voice about the same paper based on the same exact experiment, slightly different decimal points for the data, but same trend line, same results, same everything, that I'm at risk of getting expelled. And I'm a student where I have a hard time writing, and a hard time with computers, and a really hard time with scanning text. And so scanning, oh no, I said the same sentence about flagella here. Oh, said this is a personal nightmare. And so I ask, hey, I know you're saying that I can't really use my accommodations and you're going to be really strict about deadlines, but can I please, for this one lab report, have an additional 3 days? Because the way that this class works is that there's one deadline, you turn in the report by this deadline, you get full points, and then there's another deadline, and if you turn in the report by that second deadline, then you lose a singular point. And with the way my accommodations work, it seemed to me, and still, despite all the arguments, that this became hours and hours and hours of my life, and countless endless emails truly talking about this. And mind you, I have a hard time with screens and have a hard time with writing. It doesn't make sense to me that I wouldn't be able to use my accommodations on the second half of that deadline, because then that means that entire period that is totally accessible to all the other students I can't use, because it's like playing a gamble. But I can't gamble when I'm disabled and be like, oh, if I wait into the second week, I might have the disability that I still have, and if I wait and then everything looks like this, I simply will just get an F and not be allowed to submit this assignment, which she decided was how my accommodation should work. And this became this endless thing. And in our meeting at the end of the year, when I brought up that she had clearly told me that I could in fact use these accommodations just for this first lab report that she then denied ever telling me I could use, she says to me, "You're so confused. You're just confused about this. I'm sorry you're so confused, but I would never say that." Mind you, I have the recording of her saying this. It's not a debate as to whether or not she said this. She said this. And to be in this meeting with all of these people and just to feel that overwhelming shame of being yelled at that I'm just so confused because she would never say that, when not only did she say that, it is entirely reasonable when you are told that if you write a report that sounds at all like you wrote it when you've already written that exact report, you're going to get expelled, to ask to have a couple extra days to work on it, whether you're disabled or not. Anyways, I just feel like those first 2 things sort of illustrate the environment that was set up for me in this class. I don't have enough time to get into all of the other little things, but it became this repeated thing where I couldn't use my accommodations, was then told, oh, you're just going to get an F if you submit this. And then when I reached out to the disabilities office and said, hey, this seems really wrong to me, they just ignored my email. emails. They ignored so many emails from me this semester that is really problematic and really awful. Now, on to the lecture in this class. Our first major lecture assignment was a assessment was this midterm, and it was on a Thursday. I have class from 8 a.m. to 4:15 p.m. on Thursdays, and I also fall asleep right after that because it's my lab. It's the most exhausting class I have, and so I was like, I can't take this class on Thursday. And sorry, this exam. I can't take this exam on Thursday. It doesn't work for me, and I knew this pretty early on, but I didn't yet have the accommodation to reschedule exams, and having had very bad experiences with mini biology professors, didn't think that me telling her, hey, I'm not going to be able to read the questions on the exam if you make me take it at this time, would necessarily constitute an extenuating circumstance, which in the end it didn't. But as soon as I got that accommodation, I reached out to her about a little over a week before the exam and said, hey, and actually talked about the details of my disability, which you don't have to do, and said, hey, I have a brain injury. I will not be able to think or actually physically read the questions on this exam if I take it at this time. She just ignored the email. I reached out days later being like, hey, I really need to know when I'm taking this exam, and I also had offered to take it the day before it was scheduled. And I just needed to know, like, if you've ever taken any exam of any sort, you study based on when you're taking it, and I needed to know if I was taking it the Wednesday before everyone else was taking it, or that next Monday, because then I'd have a lot more time to study and could just shift things around. And she says, I never told you you could take it on a different day. When she finally responds, she asks to talk to the Disabilities Resource Center, and basically just is very confused as to why I think I should be able to reschedule this exam, just because it says that I can reschedule this exam in my accommodation. In the end, she just continually ignores these emails, and it ends up becoming this weird thing where I miss the exam, but for a reason where I'm very much allowed to miss this exam, and send her an email saying, tell me any way that I can make up this exam, please. And instead of telling me any way that I can make up this exam, she submits a course warning stating that I never attempted to make up this exam or communicated with her, which is just blatantly false. And then reaches out to me saying, you know what I can do is I can add the weight of this exam to the final. And I'm not thrilled about this, but I'm like, okay, all right, that's good at least. I'm like, I'll at least give my brain more time to heal, so that actually might be better for me in the long run. But also, in this, she continues this conversation we've been having where I had gotten COVID and been sick and had missed, like, these homework assignments. And she says, I'm very concerned that you're not submitting these homework assignments. Also, mind you, everyone else can do these homework assignments with the TA. I cannot access the TA hours. Ever. I was able to go to them once during the entire semester, and everyone else is doing these homework assignments with the TA. I can't access TA hours, and I've been told that if I try to talk to the TA outside of those hours that it's a departmental rules violation. And she says to me, I will accept these as long as you turn them in like 3 days from now, and also if you agree that upon turning these in you will not use your accommodations on any of the other ones. And there still were 2 outstanding at this point. And I reach the disabilities office and I say, this seems really problematic to me, to agree by turning in these homework assignments that I simply am just not going to be disabled for the rest of the semester. Because mind you, I don't choose when my eyes work, and that's why I have these accommodations. And the Disabilities Center simply just never responds to my email, ever. And it becomes this issue where I am like falling further behind in this class while still actively attending the lab, and I'm zooming into the lecture because at this point I just become really sick. I later found out this is whooping cough, but I don't know that at the time. I just know that I'm trying to walk up the hill and I'm getting really faint and I just can't make it physically to my one class is like here 20 minutes away up the hill. All my other classes are kind of centered in this little triangle that is not the most fun, but it's still very accessible to me. And she agrees to let me zoom in, which is great. But then she doesn't let me take the quizzes. And mind you, I have accommodations saying I can occasionally reschedule exams or assignments. And so I'm emailing her saying, hey, can I take this quiz? And like the quizzes happen on a Tuesday morning. She releases the answers sometimes on Wednesday, I think sometimes on Thursday. And I'm like, hey, I could take this quiz 7 a.m. on Wednesday. Just let me know when and where. And like I don't have any class that day. And she just never responds to a single request for me to take the quizzes. I'm running out of storage space, and so I'm going to finish this up. But I find out in this end meeting that she pushes and pushes and eventually cancels the meeting we were supposed to have before Thanksgiving break. I'm having such a hard time scheduling a meeting. They decide that I need to schedule with both professors at once. turns out they could never do that, ever, but one cancels the meeting for the others, so there's no meeting before break. And mind you, the break is a 10-day break where I could be getting missing work in and working with a TA if they agreed that I could still turn in work. And she cancels this, and then upon having the final meeting says, well, I have no grades for you. And I say, well, you ignored every time I tried to schedule a quiz and also had these weird conditions for homework. So she goes, well, that's because you didn't specify what parts of your disability you were dealing with. And the Disability Center at this point even says, well, she didn't have to do that. But the Disability Center, every single time that I pointed something out, despite, they've ignored all my email, like half my emails at this point, every single time that it's clear that a professor actually didn't let me use my accommodations, all they say is, well, nothing can be done retroactively. And that's not true. Accommodations cannot be applied retroactively. If a professor does not allow a student to use their accommodations, there are so many things that can and should be done retroactively. That is just simply not true, that nothing can be done retroactively if I had written accommodations and a professor just simply didn't let me use them or fundamentally misunderstood how I had to use them or access them. And I don't have any words beyond that. But she decides that the best thing she can do, after saying, well, I could let you turn everything in, and I say, well, could I? And she goes, no, you can't, is to have the whole weight of the lecture, of the lecture grade, just be the final, meaning the final is now 50% of my grade. And I'm like, that's not great. But she's like, well, your only other option is you fail the course. And I'm like, okay, I guess we'll do that. And then I'm waiting on an answer for the lab where I'm missing up to like 40 points, 30 of which are effort-based assignments that I was like, hey, I just need the guarantee that if I turn these in, you aren't going to give me Fs, because they're based on whether or not you tried. That's all they're based on, and they're effort-based. And then the answer comes back that instead of letting me take this one outstanding quiz, a micropipetter quiz that had been like rescheduled to time when I was on medical leave of absence, and allowing me to submit these points, that my grade was like a 40% in lab. If they'd let me submit them, I would have had like a 80%. So instead of letting me submit these for full credit when they're effort-based and giving me that 80% and letting me make up that quiz, I could have had like even higher than that. They decide that my entire grade will be the final. And they tell me this 3 days before the final is scheduled. And I've just gotten the flu. And I reached out to the attorney that I was lucky enough to try to get, and the attorney goes, you need an incomplete. I'm like, I need an incomplete. If you are making my entire grade the final, only telling me shortly before the final, it is not fair to then make me take the final when I have the flu. And long story short, because I'm running out of time, when I finally take the final, I am still way too sick to be taking that final, and I do not do well. And I didn't want to take it while sick. I never should have had to take it while sick. And I also never should have gotten forced into my entire grade being the final as a solution to all of my questions about accommodations and all of the times my professors in the Disability Resource Center ignored me. And it never should have been this hard for me to guarantee that I could get a D in this class. And I just still think back to one of the professors saying during that meeting, I don't know what to do with you, because normally students like you, when they have this many issues, they go and they leave. And I'm sick of being punished for not having gone and having left. I passed all my other classes. I don't understand why I shouldn't have gotten equal chance to get an incomplete and be able to get in work to guarantee my success in this one. I just want to graduate. I just want to leave, and I hope after listening to this, you can understand a big part of why. Thank you.